SS-Obergruppenführer Dr. Hans Kammler was the general who commanded Nazi Germany's secret weapons program. He constructed the underground layers that hid the V-2 missile program. He oversaw the construction of Germany's most advanced jet aircraft, and he was responsible for the use of tens of thousands of slave laborers from the concentration camps. He was, to all intents and purposes, the real Dr. Evil. But at war's end, this very high-ranking Nazi official simply disappeared into thin air, never to be seen again. In this film, we will try and establish what became of 43-year-old General Kammler, one of the most wanted fugitives in history. Hans Kammler was a civil engineer. He earned his doctorate in 1932. Born in Stettin, Germany, now in Poland in 1901, he had missed service in World War I, but in 1919 joined a Freikorps, one of many private right-wing armies that sprung up in post-World War I Germany that fought against communists for control in the Weimar Republic. He joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and the SS in 1933. Well regarded, he rose from head of the building department, the Air Ministry, to deputy chief of the SS Main Economic and Administration Office, a vast organization that managed finances, supply and business projects for the SS state, as well as running the concentration camps. In fact, Kammler oversaw Office D, the department that administered the concentration camp system, and also Office C, the section that designed and built the camp infrastructure. For example, Kammler oversaw the construction of the crematoria buildings of the expanded Auschwitz camp in Poland known as Birkenau. In 1942, Kammler began to be involved with the Advanced Weapons Program, again in the construction of secret facilities. He began by building manufacturing plants and test stands for the V-2 and the new Messerschmitt Me-262 jet. In August 1943, following a heavy British air raid on the Peenemünde Army Research Center in northern Germany, it was decided to shift V-1 flying bomb and V-2 missile research, development and construction to special underground facilities. These were created using vast amounts of slave labor. Kammler created the enormous Mittelwerk facility 3 kilometers northwest of the town of Nordhausen in Thuringia, plus its attached concentration camp at Mittelbau-Dora. Within the vast subterranean world, the V-1 and V-2 was built under the supervision of Nazi scientists like Dr. Arthur Rudolph and engineers like Magnus von Braun, Wernher von Braun's brother. At Mittelwerk, 2,275 V-1 flying bombs were built and used to bombard England, as well as 5,200 V-2 missiles also used to pound targets in England and parts of northwestern Europe. The facility also manufactured the revolutionary Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, or People's Fighter, a last-ditch emergency fighter that fortunately appeared just too late to pose much of a threat to the Allies, as well as having a jet fuel production facility underground as well. In total, of 60,000 people who passed through the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp and its sub-camps, some 20,000 perished, including 350 hanged by the SS. General Kammler famously said at the time, "Don't worry about the victims. The work must proceed ahead in the shortest time possible." All this construction meant that Kammler was close to Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production. Speer appointed Kammler his representative for special construction tasks. But Kammler had a strong streak of self-promotion running through him, and in March 1944 he persuaded Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, to appoint him head of special buildings under the fighter aircraft program. This made Kammler a top economic manager and more important in many regards to Albert Speer. Incredibly, from building V2 production facilities, on the 8th of August 1944, Kammler was then appointed by Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, to command the operations of the missiles themselves, which had been under the auspices of General Walter Dornberger, an army officer officially in overall command of V2 operations. On the 31st of January 1945, Kammler's command was confirmed when he became head of all missile projects in the crumbling Third Reich. It is notable that Kammler was the last officer Himmler promoted to the rank of Obergruppenführer in 1945. He was also awarded the Knight's Cross of the War Merit Cross with Swords, Germany's highest non-combat distinguished service medal. Further promotion followed. With Hermann Göring increasingly disgraced and sidelined, Kammler was able to further consolidate his power base by being appointed in early April 1945 the Führer's General Plenipotentiary for jet aircraft. With time fast running out, Kammler ordered the evacuation of Wernher von Braun and 500 missile technicians to the Alps on the 1st of April 1945. The SS Missile Launching Division was re-rolled as infantry. Kammler disobeyed the Armed Forces High Command, which had ordered him to defend the Nordhausen area against the advancing Americans, and instead he abandoned the Mittelwerk facility, sending the valuable scientists and technicians into hiding. But what about Kammler's movements at war's end? We know quite a bit because the British had actually targeted him for assassination some months before. Since February 1945, Kammler had been tracked by British intelligence via Enigma decrypts of his communications as part of a plan to kill 10 senior SS, codenamed Operation Little Foxley. The original Operation Foxley had been an ambitious plan to kill Hitler using snipers dropped by parachute close to his Alpine headquarters on the Obersalzberg in southern Bavaria. This plan was abandoned due to arguments in Britain over whether Hitler, due to his disastrous military decisions, was more useful to the Allies if left alive. Little Foxley targeted 10 important personalities. Apart from Dr. Kammler, they were SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, head of the SS Spy Service, Gruppenführer Otto Ohlendorf, Deputy Director General of the Reichsministry of Economic Affairs and former head of the Einsatzgruppe D Death Squad on the Eastern Front. Obergruppenführer Gottlob Berger, Chief of the SS Recruiting Office. Obergruppenführer Hans Jüttner, Chief of the SS Leadership Main Office. Obergruppenführer Oswald Pohl, Kammler's one-time boss at the SS Main Economic and Administration Office, and also administrator of the concentration camp system. SS Gruppenführer Richard Glücks, in charge of the concentration camp forced labor and the supervision of medical experimentation in the camps. SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's liaison at Führer headquarters, and lastly Obergruppenführer Alfred Wünnenberg, Chief of the Order Police, the Ordnungspolizei. The British found Kammler to be a difficult target to track, as in the last months of the war he moved about regularly. They tried to kill him on the 3rd and 4th of April 1945, when they knew he and his staff were at Nordhausen. Massive airstrikes by the RAF killed 8,800 people in the Nordhausen area, but Kammler and his staff survived. They drove through the burning ruins to safety. Enigma decrypts revealed that Kammler was in Munich on the 13th of April, attending a meeting with Albert Speer. Next he popped up in Ettal, at the Linderhof Palace, a large castle in southwestern Bavaria, located near to another large underground SS lair, the Messerschmitt 262 jet aircraft factory at Oberammergau. Kammler and his immediate staff reached the castle on the 22nd of April 1945. Tons of research documents were hidden nearby. Kammler didn't hang around for long. On the 28th of April, he and his staff moved to Ebensee, Austria, and the Villa Mendelssohn. Close by to Kammler's location was Ebensee concentration camp, its inmates being used to construct an underground armament storage facility. The night of the 3rd to 4th of May 1945, just 4 days before the final German surrender, Kammler gathered his staff and announced that they would be moving to Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia and still under German occupation. Although not a popular decision, the small convoy set out nonetheless. Kammler travelled in a vehicle with his driver, SS-Oberscharführer Friedrich Baum, his adjutant, Sturmbannführer Arthur Strach, following with second driver Kurt Preuck, and a handful of trucks and field cars with the remaining small staff. On the 4th of May, following a route map marked up by Preuck, the convoy passed through Linz, Austria. Interestingly, the annotations on the map ended at Friestadt, Austria, and not Prague, Czechoslovakia. Also during the movement, Kammler and his driver Baum became separated from the main convoy. At this point, the trail of Kammler runs cold. Kammler had definitely been covering his tracks. On the 4th of May 1945, a British unit had captured a bunker near Lübeck in northern Germany. Investigators found some SS vehicles that records showed belonged to Kammler's close entourage. Floating in the bunker's water tank was a badly decomposed corpse that carried Hans Kammler's identity papers. The British didn't think it was Kammler. The British last heard of Kammler on the 7th of May 1945, when they intercepted an order he sent to the SS Signal School at Leitmeritz. Kammler's location when he sent the message is unknown. The story is that Kammler and Baum made it to Prague, but they were caught up in the Czech uprising against the German occupation. Baum was apparently shot in the left knee, taken to hospital, and then killed by Czech partisans when the hospital was overrun. Interestingly, records show that an Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Baum, not SS-Oberscharführer Friedrich Baum, was admitted to the military hospital at Gmunden, Austria, on the 23rd of May 1945, after having been shot in the knee in Prague on the 4th of May. The ranks are a similar grade, 1 Army, 1 SS, as is the name and type of injury. Many SS personnel changed into regular Army uniform at war's end to avoid arrest. Anyway, Army Senior Sergeant Baum died of an infection at Gmunden on the 29th of May 1945 and was buried locally. A further search of Army records reveals that there was never an Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Baum Army driver. Was this Kammler's SS driver? Hospital records show that Baum had been shot in the right knee, not the left, as reported in the original story. Many have surmised that the Baum in Gmunden was actually a wounded Kammler who had changed into an army uniform and adopted his dead driver's name, escaping from Prague until his infected wound caused him to seek medical attention, but it was too late to save his life and he died of blood poisoning. But there is a twist in this scenario. In 1967, Austrian authorities emptied several small cemeteries of German wartime dead and reinterred them in one large cemetery. When Baum's grave was opened, it was found to be empty. Had Kammler faked his own death in late May 1945, perhaps with some help? Another story, long reported, has been that Kammler killed himself while on the run. Some of his staff, who were later captured by the Allies, reported that Kammler and some of his staff left Prague on the 9th of May 1945. Kammler had left in the midst of a German army convoy. Near to the town of Písek, in southern Czechoslovakia, Kammler had pulled over and either shot or poisoned himself. Then been buried by loyal staff in an unmarked grave, the location of which they couldn't remember or wouldn't divulge. In 1949, Kammler's roadside suicide was refuted by a U.S. counterintelligence corps agent working on denazification in Hessen. This man stated that Kammler had in fact been captured by the Americans in May 1945, but had escaped and was then working for the Soviets in East Germany. Had Kammler actually fallen into U.S. hands on or about the 9th of May 1945 at Oberammergau, and the entire Prague story been fabricated to provide a plausible death scenario for Kammler in the soon-to-be Soviet occupation zone where no proper investigation could ever be made? The seeming lack of urgency with which the Allies searched for Kammler immediately after the war suggests that they already had him in secret custody and didn't want the Soviets to know. For example, his name was kept out of the Nuremberg trials. In 35,000 pages of testimony and evidence, Kammler, who oversaw the concentration camps, was mentioned a grand total of only 26 times. He was also declared dead fairly quickly as well. In September 1949, Kammler's widow petitioned to have her husband declared legally dead, and this was approved without any fuss, conveniently halting any official interest by intelligence organizations in searching for him. At war's end, Kammler had only been 43 years old, so it may be assumed that he would have lived on for decades after the war. Considering the lack of any evidence for his death, apart from contradictory stories from loyal SS staff, the decision seems suspect and pointed to a very alive Kammler in Allied hands. He had some use to the Western intelligence services. He knew where certain people and documents were hidden, and so on. Though he was not a scientist like Wernher von Braun and the thousands of Nazis the Americans shipped to the States after the war in Operation Paperclip to populate NASA and other government agencies with the Third Reich's best brains. A hint of a possible fate for Kammler was the story of an OSS officer who claimed decades later that Kammler was sent to the United States and held in captivity until 1947, but that he then committed suicide. 2 reports have emerged from declassified US files that seem to show that Kammler was in American hands. The first, dated May 30th, 1945, originally from the headquarters, the US Strategic Air Forces in Europe, lists Kammler on a list of senior German Air Force personnel in US custody. Top of the list was Hermann Göring. Kammler's name appears at number 18, listed as Inspector of all jet fighter units of the Luftwaffe. Kammler's capture is noted on another document dated July 10, 1945, an organizational structure of the Luftwaffe in the final stages of the war. Kammler is listed as one of the prisoners held for interrogation. What became of Kammler thereafter remains a mystery. Did he, as reported by the OSS, kill himself while in US captivity in 1947? We may never know, but I think it is clear that Kammler survived the war and never faced justice for his considerable crimes. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.